left the crusts on their sandwiches, did they?
We couldn't get in.
Quite ogling at the door.
Yeah, I was just trying to find the agenda on there. I've got the Teams and just lowered it. For now. It won't go away. Here we are.
Right.
Find it all this up.
Okay, Chair, we're live now.
Are we okay to go, John, as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, good to go now, Dave.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm looking for the agenda now. Then where are we? Right. Welcome to the November meeting of the Democratic Services Committee, and nice to see you all. I hope your drive in line with the weather. And we'll start with item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Are there any, please?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Good attendance down there at County Hall and remotely then. And we'll move on to the second item, which is declarations of interest. Are there any to declare?
As and when, I think.
As and when. Everybody happy to declare them should the need arise? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 3 then, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. And those have been circulated, and it's the meeting that was held on the 26th of September. Is it in order for these to be signed as a true and accurate record of the meeting held in September? That's what we need to know now.
Yes, Chair. Yeah.
Yes, Chair. Everybody, yes, rather. Everybody happy?
Shall I ask a question, please?
Phil's got a hand up.
Right. Okay. Sorry. I've
just that, was it on the 26th of September, the last meeting? Did it say that tour and guides and code of conduct would be part of the next meeting? And this is the next meeting, is it?
Yes,
this is certainly the next meeting. Tour guides.
Tour guides and code of conduct.
Chair,
Yeah,
Chair,
sorry, John?
The tour, we're still looking at the options at the moment. We haven't got a definitive plan to bring to you, and I think at the minute, if you look outside, it's probably not the best time for us to be traipsing around our beautiful countryside at the minute. So if you bear with us on that one, we'll get something brought in for the new year, and then as the weather turns better and we have a bit more life in the day, we can really make the trip worthwhile then for you.
Okay, thank you.
And the code of conduct?
I have to remind, was the code of, it wasn't
Louise
the code
brought it up.
It wasn't the code of conduct, it was the
I've got it wrong, have I?
it
There were
was,
two things.
It was expectations in meeting with the public and member
standards,
officer.
Public expectations around that, and I can confirm that the customer services policies now, wherever they refer to staff, all refer to elected members as well. So our customer services team have been through that policy and updated it with all those references that we agreed at the previous meeting.
Right. And I think the issue then was more so possibly the public's attitude towards members and staff than necessarily members or staff with each other, really. So how we overcome that, I don't really know. Councillor Watts.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for bringing me in there. If I'm wrong about it, then please excuse me, members. Wasn't there some kind of conversation about then where there was a broader awareness, so it was about better communication between officers, councillors, the public? If I'm going off on a tangent, then maybe I'm just fantasizing this now, but wasn't there a conversation about effectively, or was it just me that mentioned it, that officers actually knew who the councillors was, or was that another meeting?
I don't recollect that, but somebody else can come in if they wish to.
I don't recollect it, but what I can probably help to appease some of those comments there, Ahmed, is that the comms team, do you remember the old leaflets we used to have with who all the new councillors are, the wards they represent, and the posters?
Yeah, I remember it well, yeah.
They're going away and designing those now, so we're getting those out to all the officers, potentially looking at, the compass emails that you get from comms with what's going on, maybe a who's who of the councillors in those to try and get the links out then to the new members new members of staff then who aren't aware of who some of these new members or even existing ones are.
Yeah, can I just say on that point, if I may, Chair, through you, on that point, I think it's important really because of COVID that probably we say new members of staff. I'm simply not making this up. So I had a question that needed a legal answer and I didn't get it. specifically relating to an issue in my ward. So it was a new ward issue, the new part of my ward. I've got a shared ward with Sue. Most of you know that. And the legal officer, I'm not going to name names because it would be unfair, and I know John's cringing because he knows what I'm going to say, referred to me as Amanda. Now, I've been on the authority now for 18 years. I've never been Amanda. I don't intend being Amanda. I did get an apology, but that was someone who clearly didn't have a clue who I was. Now, I don't want to come across as do you know I am like Graham Powell, but the reality is it's a good idea if councillors are aware of the officers are, and likewise, really, Chair.
Yes. Yeah. Fair comment. I take your point. And John, anything else to add there, or are you happy to take Armin's point?
Yeah, in the last meeting as well about seminars, wasn't it? As part of the induction program, we did look at having specific service areas and a who's who of the managers within those areas meeting councillors as well. That was dropped just because of just the work that was ongoing from the election and the fallout of it. It wasn't the right time to do that. But I definitely look at seeing if we can pick that up and a members seminar between members and key officers from each directorate, just as a who's who and an introduction, and that poster then of who the members are sitting underneath it for the wider members of staff to be aware as well.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Davis?
Josh Cadero, thank you, Chair. Just a very minor comment, just looking at the minutes, I seem to recall at the last meeting of the 26th, and with apologies if I'm going doolally because I'm slightly sleep deprived with a newborn, but I seem to recall on that very day there was an issue with the Welsh Language Commissioner publishing a non-compliance report in relation to the authority's compliance with its own Welsh language standards and Welsh language scheme, which I believe I alluded to under any other business. And I think I asked for an opportunity maybe at a future meeting of this committee to talk about Welsh language provision more broadly as part of the Democratic Service Committee's deliberations. I just draw your attention to that, Chair, and perhaps the minutes might be updated if my recollection is accurate. Hopefully, if somebody else can verify that.
Any verification anywhere? Or yeah.
We'll do a double check, Chair and Councillor Davis. Right. The only question I might have is it really a remit for perhaps a scrutiny meeting to consider a specific service area rather than the Democratic Services Committee that is mostly focused on the members' needs and what members need to deliver it. But again, we can have that discussion outside the meeting and see what's the best avenue for it, if you like.
And happy to include it on the any future agenda if that's appropriate or applicable. Thank you. Right, as far as the minutes are concerned, then are we happy that we can move on and sign them if that need arises? I'm not sure. Do we sign minutes anymore?
Well, when we see you, yes, but
okay, right. I'll sign them when I see you then, John. Okay, thank you. Excellent. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda then, which is probably just one computer flicking back and forth. The council diary. I believe that John is going to tell us more about the council diary and the principles behind it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. For previous members, you'll recognise this fairly straightforward report. Just for planning purposes, we need to put a schedule of meetings in place for the next council year. We'd like to bring it in as early as possible so members can plan their summers and work around the meetings as they're in the diary. Clearly, we had a discussion earlier in this term around the timing of meetings. The diary doesn't reflect any discussions there because the decision was to review the timing of meetings after 12 months. So we'd be looking at around next May for that. To include timings there, or to put a diary together for next May would obviously be too late. So once we undertake that review of the timing of meetings, then we will obviously look to just amend the times as they are in the diary rather than set new dates for meetings, just to give that consistency as well. So the schedule's there. Happy to receive any comments or views from members on anything we might have got wrong. We've avoided school holidays and bank holidays as obviously requested by members previously. Fridays are generally kept as clear as possible for you to do outside bodies work or community council work as you and casework as you need to. And once we've got agreement from the committee here and SLT, then we'll take it to full council for decision in the future. So probably the next council meeting. The only other point, sorry, Chair, that I'm asking for the committee's views on is how they want to proceed this term with holding the AGM. Towards the end of the last term, we did away with 2 separate meetings, one on the Tuesday, which would appoint the chairman, and then any other deferred business was held on the Thursday. We did it once, it wasn't a problem. To be honest, that's in line with what most other authorities do as well, just one AGM meeting. Post-election, with the fallout from the election results and for planning purposes, it was probably easier to hold 2 separate meetings. One to appoint the chairman and one for the leader to appoint the cabinet. But I'd run it by the leader. She's happy for the committee to really make a recommendation on what they think is the most appropriate arrangements for the AGM. So over to you, members, really, for any comments and your views on the AGM, please.
Okay, thank you, John. There's a few hands up. I think the first one was Councillor Bond. Jill? You're muted, Jill.
Still muted.
Still muted, Jill?
Okay,
sorry,
thank you. I
right
raised it on the chat rather than on the group, on the meeting online. Just something that I've fallen foul of a couple of times when meetings have been booked on the day before planning committee. I see on some months that it's been put that there's a visits, there's planning site visits like in July, but in June there isn't. Oh no, there is on June, but there isn't in May. So I wonder if there's why some weeks, some months, not others. If you could provisionally put them in every month, then that would stop people booking over the planning visits, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bond. I'm pretty sure we've done it for all the other months. The reason we didn't do it for May
No, didn't do it for November, September, August, or September or May. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I'll double check that then. I thought we left
Thank
the
you.
date blank anyway. The reason May was left blank was because of the bank holiday
Right.
and the uncertainty around the extra bank holiday that was coming in for the coronation, which we now know is there, and then whether the planning site visits for that meeting would take place on the Friday or on the actual bank holiday, or whether they wanted to move the meeting altogether. So at the minute, it's there. The date for planning in May will stay the same, and the site visits will take place on that Friday rather than the bank holiday Monday of that meeting. But I'm pretty sure we've made sure the rest of those Mondays before a bank planning committee are clear, even if we haven't specifically stated in the diary that there's
September and August, I think.
Let's just
Particularly. August, or maybe there's August, maybe it's the 31st of August. Anyway, you can check that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Strong had his hand up next from what I saw. I appreciate it's different on the chat bar, but we'll try and accommodate them as I see them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Strong.
Quickly on the AGM, I think with it being a new council this year, it was entirely appropriate to have a separate meeting. It was quite a big sense of occasion, especially with so many new councillors, and also maybe part of that sort of process of getting to know who's who. I think, however, when it's the same council in its second year and beyond, putting the 2 meetings together is very, very sensible thing to do. On the other point about the diary, again, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we talked about doing a survey of elected members to see how they felt about timings of meetings and so on. I'm just wondering if that's, I mean, we're not going to change it from May, obviously, but I just wonder if that's a process that we ought to start getting underway earlier rather than later in order to start to grapple with what are pretty difficult issues in resolving all the conflicts there.
Thank you. Do you want to come in there, John, or are you?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to be guided by you as to when you really want to start it. The reason we delayed, obviously, making a decision on it was that particularly the newer members wanted more experience in the role before making a decision on when the relevant timing of the meeting was that they wanted to. We've got until May to really look at this again. So the reason I haven't done any more with it is just to let members get that more experience in the role at the minute. So whether it's something you want me to start in the new year, now, again, happy to be guided by you really, but would we be getting the information we need right now if we're waiting on more experience from members at the minute?
Okay, thank you. Are you coming back, Councillor Strong, or?
Yeah, I would have thought that by now. I mean, if we look at where the gaps are on the forward work programme, and if we've got time to deal with it in February and March, we should at least just begin the process then. It can be quite a complicated thing putting together a meaningful survey. So if we can look at it somewhere around about that stage.
Yeah, will do.
Yep, great.
Okay,
Happy
thank
with
you.
that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McConnell. Sue?
Oh, thank you. I was going to say absolutely everything that Councillor Strong has just said. So you can, I'll just flag up my support for his comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jones, Penny.
Yeah, the same really might have been said, but as for the two meetings that we had this year, the AGM and then the council meeting, I think it was really, really important to have separate ones because we had so many newcomers and a new chair. But from now on, it really would make sense and less use of, people's time and energy because it's 2 in 1 week usually, isn't it? So I think we ought to have one meeting. And I feel quite strongly about that. And yes, I agree that we could start the process for the timings of meetings in the new year, but we did agree as a whole, I think in council that people wanted to wait till May. So I'm not happy to make a final decision before then. But yes, as you say, Peter, the surveys, etc., are long and complicated. So perhaps start in the new year. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Penny. Is it fairly universal agreement within this committee that the AGM and the first council meeting should be united into one meeting? If that's not too contradictory, I think they say.
Can I just ask, don't we have a new lead? So would it be the leader would be different and therefore?
Not necessarily. It depends who the leader can be re-elected.
It's chair, yeah.
Yes, chair.
It's just the chair.
So maybe if there's a new chair.
So
does
anybody know something I don't?
But they won't be brand new.
Yeah, they would see my gun.
Maureen wants to come in. Councillor Powell.
Maureen's leader now. Okay.
Yeah. One other thing I was going to say about that, I really do agree. But at the same time, if you're changing the chairman each year, usually you have a bit of a social part of it because there's a new chairman and the chairman's and the some dignitaries can, don't they each? And I think, if it's just an ordinary meeting, they're sort of coming into the ordinary meeting and then kicked out again. And people like Lord Lieutenant, High Sheriff and the vicars and that's the only thing that they will feel a bit shortchanged if we just have the meeting and nothing else. That's the only thing I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Chair, can I come back in there?
Yes. I was just going to ask you now.
Just that we have an AGM of sorts, and we get that all sorted out, and perhaps a little tea party afterwards. A cup of tea and a cake, and then we start the meeting afterwards. So everybody can go home, and then we can carry on with our meeting. So although it's in the day, we can divide it up and make it something.
Okay.
We'll find that. All right, Jen. Thank you, Penny.
Right. Are we all happy with tea and cake before moving on to the guts of the meeting then?
Yeah, no vol au-vents, Chair.
Right. No pies for you, Armand. Right.
No pies.
Okay. Moving on then to Penny Jones had a hand up twice, so we've catered for Penny, have we? Anything else to say about the diary now then, before we move on to item 5? Okay, we'll move on to item 5 then, the draft remuneration panel report for 22-23. Back to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So quite a much shorter remuneration panel report this year for the draft report anyway, as it has been in previous years. Generally, they come out and put their full report out for the year. to let us read through it, but kindly they've just sort of pulled out the main headlines and the main changes from this year to what they're proposing for next year, and made it into a much shorter document. I think the headline changes are an increase in the basic salary again for all members. That's going up to 17,600 now. Small increases in the additional salaries paid on top of that, because obviously everyone gets their basic salary, then they get an amount on top of that for any senior responsibilities they get. So there's no significant jump in those, just a main basic increase in the basic payment that all members are getting. And that's really the only headline for the county councillors within the report. There's lots of issues there around community councils, but that'll be for them to determine whether it's appropriate for them to adopt and make those payments as the report sets out. Like I say, it's the draft report that they put out for consultation. If there are any views from the committee, we can feed back to the remuneration panel what our views are. And if not, we can just let them go and we'll wait until the final report comes out in February. This report used to go to council, but it only used to go to council because council needed to make determinations on the level of pay for specific roles. They no longer need to do that. The salaries are set out, the posts are set out. So once council makes those appointments to a post, the remuneration to that automatically kicks in. And by default, as an authority, we have to pay that unless a specific member requests not to receive a portion of that. So it won't go to full council because we have to follow it through unless a specific member requests anything different. So if there's anything members' views have got on this particular report for next year, then and the committee wants to put a response to the remuneration panel, then we can do so. So I'll open the floor and open up to members' views.
Okay, Councillor Bond.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Armand, I've seen your hand. I'll come back to you, all right?
Thank you very much. Thanks, John. I think, not John, I think I just heard you say that it's only the basic that's increasing. Personally, I'm not sure that this is the right time to be doing this. That's all. That's my only concern. Current climate, everything that's happened to everybody else, cost of living, everything else. It doesn't sit well with me. That's me personally. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd echo the views expressed by Councillor Bond. I understand there's an independent process to set and agree council pay terms and conditions, but I too find it quite extraordinary during a cost of living crisis with the squeeze on local government budgets, including our own authority, it must be said. I find it quite extraordinary that the Independent Pay Board should propose this pay rise for county councillors, and I think as a committee and indeed as a council, we should reflect very carefully on what's been proposed, and I think it would be a very powerful signal indeed if this committee was to make it known to the independent panel that we felt deeply uncomfortable with what's being proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sympathetic to this, and I had the same initial reaction. On the other hand, it's always difficult. As a council, we should reflect on the situation that the constituent, our county and the economy is in, but we should also reflect the people that we should reflect the communities that we represent. And while the rewards for being a councillor are slim, I'm sure all of us, if you divide it per hour into the hourly rate, it's not a wage. The danger is that the poorer the rewards for councillors and representatives are, the less representative they become, because it becomes the territory of the retired and the well-off, which doesn't then reflect the community. So I'm not coming to any conclusion about this. I'm just saying I think it's more nuanced than it's a bit rubbish to do that. That it's uncomfortable at this point, because in principle I would actually, in principle, all things being equal and the economy in cracking form, I would be very much in favour of the allowances being raised steeply for representatives so that we could be more representative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Watts will come.
Yeah, no, I mean, I find it incredible that we've got a cost of living crisis, but let's park that up a minute. I mean, I think Sue's point about being nuanced, it is more nuanced. So effectively, if you've got people who are self-employed, I'm not just talking for the self-employed, but people who are on low salaries, low incomes or whatever, and they're asked to be a county councillor, you know, the kind of interruption in your working routine means that you'll probably have to then suffer a significant loss of income because you've taken up the county council's role. Now that obviously varies on whatever profession you do, and it is what it is. I still remember lengthy conversations with family members who were county councillors over public service. So I still think there's something in that, but the reality is that people need to be remunerated for the job that they do. And I strongly believe that, Chair. That's a kind of key to my thinking and who I am. And I'm sure my colleagues in the Labour group and elsewhere will also say that. The only question I've got about this is I noticed, so in principle, I'm not opposed to a marginal pay increase as long as in line with everything else. The backdrop of the issue is if we are then facing potential or significant redundancies within the authority, that's when I start to it really starts to make me feel very uncomfortable. So I'm sure everybody will be jotting that down. The other point I wanted to make finally is with the introduction, and if I got this wrong, maybe John can put me right on it, the introduction of a salary for the vice chairs. Was that always the case? I wasn't even sure, as a new chair myself, whether or not there was a salary for vice chair. I thought it was just you were more, you know, left to hold up the responsibility of support with no remuneration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Did you want to come in on that one, John? Or
Yeah. Just to say the remuneration for the vice chair has always been there, and I think it's actually come down a bit in recent years as well from what it used to be.
Okay.
Not vice chairs on committees.
Not vice chairs for committees, no, sorry, just the vice chairman of the council.
Yeah.
Oh, I meant for committees, John. So is that a new thing?
No, there is no remuneration for vice chairs of committees, just the chairs of committees. We've got, there's a certain number of senior salary posts that we're allowed to pay an additional salary to within the whole remuneration panel report. By the time you take the leader, deputy leader, cabinet, committee chairs, leader of the biggest opposition group, we pretty much use most of those up. So there is no scope for expanding that out to vice chairs of committees.
Can't we just, I mean, to be fair, Penny's an excellent deputy chair, and I'm sure, you know, other chairs will feel the same, that their deputies are worth this. So could we not just take the money for the leader of the opposition and then give it to the deputy chairs?
If members wish to forgo parts of their salary, then they're entitled to do so, and doing so in writing to us.
Could I make that as a recommendation, Chair?
This is the difficulty with the report, and that the only way we can deviate from the contents within it is by the individual members writing to us and giving us that consent in how they want to manage their own funds. And it's right. The reason it's like that is so that there's no political agenda that's going to impact on an individual's circumstances if they cannot forego any part of their salary. If this is their main employment, they can't use political advantage to do that.
Of course.
okay, moving swiftly onwards. Councillor Jones, Penny.
Thank you. I think we're being a bit presumptive. I do agree with you, Sue, on nearly everything you've said. But, you know, none of us know what everybody's going through. There's a cost of living crisis. And how do we know how that is affecting everybody? If you're a hardworking councillor, you are incurring costs all the time, especially in a rural area. You have petrol costs, which are now unbelievable. But does that stop you going out? You have fuel, energy costs, you know, when you're working from home. And it's all adding up. It's all very well. If you have a lucrative job beside this post, then that is fine. But many people have not. And, you know, I'm not talking just people who are retired. There are other people who want to come into the council who don't have those means. And we are deterring them from applying by keeping the salary deliberately it is low anyway. It's a pittance, but that's fine. I mean, we've got to accept it. But if we are offered by an independent commission to, you know, a slight increase, whatever the circumstances, then I think we should think about taking it. But I do realise that people who don't want to take it can refuse. And I think it's very much an individual choice.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. We'll move on to Councillor Butler, and welcome to this committee.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Well, what I'd say is that it is an independent process and therefore should be treated as an independent process. There are different circumstances. I personally am conflicted about it. I personally would feel uncomfortable if the lowest pay award awarded to the council, officers, teachers, etc., was less than than the Commission are proposing for us. But Councillor Jones is very right. There are real costs in representing a very rural ward, as there are actually in a more urban setting. So I firmly believe it should be an independent process. I think it's good that it is, and that's what I would want to abide by.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was looking back. I don't know how many years ago it was. Probably John could remember. We didn't take our rise. Well, some did and some didn't. But I don't think anybody in the public knew we'd done it. They didn't care two hoots whether we'd done it or not. So we were trying to make a point by helping the poorer people by not taking it. But I don't think anybody ever noticed. And then when it had to go up again and it went up a bit more, then it showed. So I think, and it's like Penny says, I mean, it depends on people's circumstances. And if there's the old saying, isn't there? A labourer is worthy of his hire. And I think we've got to remember that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Powell. Move on to Councillor Bond.
Well, I think Maureen's just said actually that what I was thinking of, is it possible to just delay this step? Oh, by the way, this is my first. I know I think appear like I'm everywhere. It's my first meeting as well, David.
Oh, sorry, I do apologise.
It's all right. I'm replacing Councillor Sandals. Anyway, I wonder if it's just possible to delay it by 6 months to see what happens in the environment to everything. But I mean, I think everybody's said differently. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I agree, with what Councillor Jones and Councillor McConnell have said, and as Councillor Powell said, a labourer is worthy of his hire. I think we are in serious danger of excluding a more diverse and representative range of people from becoming councillors or going into local government in any way if we don't remunerate them sufficiently. For as long as this council operates as it does during daytime hours, it's very difficult for most councillors to hold down full-time employment. Today, this is the second scrutiny committee I've sat in today, for example. While this is easy for me at the moment, because obviously I'm on the chair's allowance, when I become a backbencher again next civic year, that won't be the case. And for a lot of councillors, the amount of time that this takes out of their potential working week means if they're not adequately financially compensated for doing that, then we are looking at a situation where people who can either earn a lot of money part-time somehow, or who are retired are really going to be the only people in a position to become councillors. Now, I think it would be an easy and quite populist move to say, oh no, let's reject it. But although it may seem a difficult decision to defend to some residents or to the public, I think there is a case where we must say the cost of living crisis is not only affecting the people we represent, it is affecting a lot of us too. I think I think Councillor Buckler was correct to say that this needs to remain an independent process, because although you have the individual option to turn it down, I think the moment you step towards us as councillors deciding what our remuneration should be, we're moving towards a deeply risky territory of politicians setting their own wages. And I think that's a path that we actually don't want to go down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis. And
Thanks,
Councillor
Chair.
Strong, I've seen your hand there, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. This is perhaps a question for the officers in attendance, and it might help contextualise some of the discussions and the debate that's ensued. Am I correct in understanding that in the last pay round, county councillors were awarded a 16.9% pay increase?
It was a significant increase. I can't remember the exact figure. It was a couple of £1,000 increase on what it was.
Yeah, it went from 14,368 to 16,800 in the last financial settlement, a rise of 16.9%. So I just want to contextualise what's being proposed. This salary hike follows hot on the heels of a 16.9% salary increase in the last financial year. And whilst I have every sympathy with what Councillor Wright has been saying about attracting and encouraging a diverse pool of prospective councillors, and particularly, I think, looking at how we accommodate those with particular needs, particularly family or childcare or caring needs. And indeed, I think there is a whole body of work for this committee to investigate in terms of how we create that environment for those with specific responsibilities and obligations. I still find it deeply jarring that we, as an authority, during an economic cost of living crisis with a financial squeeze on this authority's budget in particular, but local authorities more generally, should even contemplate and seek to justify to our electorate that we are prepared to endorse the pay panel's proposed recommendations. I hear that the strength of feeling. I seem to be a lone voice on this one, but I want the record to note, Chair, that I feel deeply uncomfortable in endorsing what's being proposed here today.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Strong?
Yes, while the increase last year was pretty hefty, it was based on an independent reassessment of the nature of the job. If it was correct for us to do as we did and to accept that last year, it's surely correct that we accept it this year, because the increase is 4.75%, which, as our staff unions will all tell us, actually is a pay cut in real terms, not a pay rise. It's less than, for example, is being offered to our teachers at 5%, which we all know is inadequate in maintaining their standard of living. So we're not, in fact, getting a pay rise. We're getting what amounts to a pay cut. I'm not suggesting that we hold out for more, but I'm suggesting that it being an independent report, we take on board particularly the points made by Councillor Wright and accept the report in its entirety.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Jones. Penny.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a point about last year's remuneration. Am I right, John? Well, I know I am. I've been a councillor for lots of years, and we did not have a pay rise for a very long time. So last year was catch-up time. It wasn't giving time. It wasn't for the future. It was for the past. We'd have had no rise at all, despite everybody else in the public sector doing so. So last year was catch-up time, and I suggest that this year we just keep up to date with it. I will remind you again, it's everybody is affected by the cost of living crisis, not just our residents. So, we've got to think more broadly, right across the board, not just within this room. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McConnell, we'll come to Councillor Watts after that.
Just a couple of points. One, just picking up on something Penny said, as a public servant, I haven't had a pay rise for years. The other thing is just a concern. My understanding is that if we accept this report, then individual councillors will be at liberty to choose not to take the rise. I think it would be extremely distasteful if that became a thing which was made public. So there'll be a sort of naming and shaming of those who hadn't. I think that would be very unpleasant and potentially damaging behaviour. So I'd just like to put that marker down.
Yeah, part of the requirement of the remuneration panel's report is that at the end of every financial year, we publish the amounts we paid to every councillor, so that goes on the website.
Yeah.
So at the end of the financial year, those figures will be available, and if a member forgoes part of their salary, then that report will reflect that. It's not going to be any announcement that someone's forgoing it, but the document will be publicly available to show the amounts that are paid.
I would plead with individual councillors to leave it there rather than take it anywhere else.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Watts.
Yeah, I would be disappointed, wouldn't it, if we got into shaming the hearts of the council for not taking the pay increase. And I've been on this authority for a long time now, that there have been pay increases. They've always been like, there's been a review, then there's been a debate, then finally, then a year later, people then suck up the kind of the pay increase. And the problem with that is that unless they're kind of incremental, when you just add them on every 3 or 4 years, then that becomes, as Penny kind of intimated, really, that becomes a problem then with the public, because they think, because politics is what it is, people just then say, well, they've got their noses in a trough. Look at that. Now, what I promise you, if I can give some advice, if I can, to Thomas, is that, with the economy looking in the shape that it is, and the economic forecasts aren't looking good for the next 2 years, if we waited another 2 years and then took a massive pay increase, well, we're going to cop it, really. So I think it's only fair that we take into consideration that the pay increases there. You can, quite freely not take those, as Sue intimated. Then you can opt to not take them. But I think it's better to have those little incremental kind of pay increases that are in line with the advice. We're not setting themselves. These are not our, look, we're going to pay ourselves a whole load of money. They're done for us, which I think really helps us as well. So I would just like to leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John, in line with presenting the report, do we have to what decision do we have to make today? Do we just accept the report? Do we?
I've just asked Nicola to prepare a vote just to go in the chat bar, just to see if we want to write a recommendation or respond to the Commission's consultation on it, to say we're in support of the contents of the draft proposals. And if that's a route you want to go down, Chair, then we can do that, and I can put something out to them after the meeting.
Right.
Obviously, members are still individual members, and parties are entitled to respond to the Commission's consultation as well, separately, to give their own views if they want to. It's whether as a committee we want to respond to it, and whether we want to respond in favour or against that.
Right, okay. So how do we want to respond then? A vote would probably be the quickest way. Any thoughts?
The vote should be in the chat bar now, Chair.
Okay, right. Right, okay. Shall we vote for that then? Vote for or against, as your conscience will allow. Right, not quite sure how many of us there are, but there's 10 people that have cast a vote, and the majority is in favour of accepting the report. So have we had the time given for people to vote, John? Or am I jumping the gun a bit?
We've got Councillor Stevens, you had a problem with the chat bar. Were you for or against? For. So it's 9 for, 2 against, Chair. So that's pretty clear. And I'll draft a response after this to the remuneration panel to show our support as a committee for the contents of their draft proposals.
Okay, thank you. Right, the next item on the agenda is Item 6, the changing of the voting system for local elections. Over to you again, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Under the Local Government and Elections Wales Act, new provisions came in May 2022 to allow local authorities to determine the most appropriate voting system for their local elections. The two systems are available are the first past the post system that we use currently, or a move to a single transferable vote system, which is a form of proportional representation. Local authorities have until the 15th of November 2024 to make a decision as to whether they want to move to that different voting system or not. But there are some quirks around the decision and some stipulations that have to be put in place. So, for example, we have to give 21 days notice of the council meeting, which will just consider that single item. And in order for the change to take effect, it needs a 2/3 majority in favour of it within the council as well. Because we haven't had the opportunity to change or consider the most appropriate voting method for our local authority, I was proposing a member seminar and some information away from the public domain to allow us to fully consider the impact of the changes. So, for example, if we move to a form of proportional representation, it will mean there are no more single member wards within the council. You need at least 3 members within each ward. And within a rural setting, how large will some of those wards begin to be? We've only just been through an electoral review with members pushed for single member wards, and this change would obviously affect that as well. But lots of other implications. So, and again, just coming back to the electoral review, for those members who were here last term, you'll remember we only had it signed off, I think, 6 months before the election on what the actual boundaries were going to be. It didn't leave political parties long to know what their ward boundaries were, to plan for the candidates who were going to stand in those wards. And the later we leave this towards November 2024, it's roughly 2 years to do an electoral review. That'll take us to November 2026. And we're back in the same boat again. So the reality from a practical and administrative side is we want to make a decision on this sooner rather than later. But we need to do that on the back of members being fully informed on what the implications are. So in the new year, I propose to hold a member seminar, which will take us through the stages of getting to changing the system, the implications of that. The only downside at the minute is we don't have the final regulations from Welsh Government on how we would administer the election, so how we would run, what form of proportional representation or single transferable vote is actually going to be used. There are a whole host of different systems that include waiting on the second vote, for example, as it moves through. And we need to be clear on that before I start anything. But if members are happy with that proposal, once I have those regs and understand the full impact of the voting process and how we'll come to deciding who's elected, I'll put a member seminar together where we'll gauge the interest in the change. Because again, I don't really think it's appropriate for us to take it to full council if we're very clear that we're not going to have a 2/3 majority in support of that. I think it'd be a waste of council time. So let's take it out of the political arena, have a clear conversation around the impacts of those changes. And if there is support for it, then we will put it to full council. So I'll open up to any questions on that process, or if anybody thinks I should do it any differently.
Okay, thank you, John. We've got a few hands up, both on the chat bar and otherwise. Let's go to the chat bar first then. Councillor Powell.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I agree with what John says about us having a seminar. But apart from the seminar, I've been a county councillor for 15 years, but I've been involved with councils and elections, both locally and nationally, for a good many years, since about 1980. And I feel that it would be detrimental to the people. Now, those of you who, like me, have a single ward, you'll probably feel the same as I do. The people know you, they know who to go to. If you have huge wards with 3 or 4 different councillors, they won't know who they really want to speak to. They might not even know 1 or 2 of them. You lose that contact. And after all, what we're here for is for the people, not just to make things nicer for us, whatever our politics are, it's for the people. And I'm very much against this thing. I was a bit dubious when we had some of the multi-wards now, because to me, it's far better if you've got 1 person per ward where the people can link with them, you work for them, they come to you when they have a problem, and it seems more convenient for the public. They're the people who are going to elect us. They're the people who we're looking after, not ourselves. So that's my opinion, but I'm getting on now. Some young people might feel different.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Bond.
For the same reasons as Maureen, exactly the same reasons, I'd like to propose that we accept John's proposal, and really I'd like to understand the implications before and keep open-minded until we hear the implications. So please, can we accept John's proposal? It's a brilliant idea.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, well, STV will damage local democracy. There's no doubt about it. It's actually going to be less effective representation. And for those of us who are councillors, because we want to represent our communities and get to know our communities, it really is not a way forward. It requires a 2/3 majority. And this is going to be hard, as John has said, to obtain. So I'm just wondering, especially as it's so soon after previous changes, and I'm one of the wards that it hasn't gone smoothly in particularly, I'm suggesting that is there a necessity to go forward with even a seminar or any other form? Can't we just say that we don't want to go ahead with this now? How are we going to get this through with a 2/3 majority when, and people really aren't for it in those numbers? So I just don't know that there is any reason. It's almost a waste of time, waste of resourcing, waste of staffing, and most importantly, a waste of money at a time when we are, as we have been discussing, short of money. So that's my view, Chair. I'd like to perhaps just abandon this or bin it or postpone it. Let's say postpone it for a time. I know it has to be November 24. That's the only thing, but...
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
John, is there, can we do what Councillor Jones is suggesting? Is that an option? That's what I'm asking.
I mean, there's no precedent on it. The difficulty with it is there's still only a small number of members sat around the table to gauge that report. We've never actually asked the question, are you in favour of it? And I think that's where we can have that members seminar to gauge whether there's going to be a 2/3 majority for it or not. And if there's clearly not, then we don't waste council time in debating something that's never going to actually get through. But we do the due diligence in the background to explore that and make sure that is the case before we get to that stage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I must say I agree, overwhelmingly with what Councillor Jones has just said. I cannot see any way in which we would achieve 2/3 of the council being in support of this, because certainly my group did not stand on a manifesto which included any mention of this, never mind any support for it. I don't believe that was the case for the opposition group either. I can't say for the independents or for our Green councillor. I'm afraid I did not read their platforms. But as the two, as the two groups of us form the bulk of the council, and I just don't see a democratic mandate for this change.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Buckler.
I feel very strongly that we should have personal representation of each ward, and that the people who elected us want personal representation. I don't think I think it's entirely impossible that we would get a 2/3 majority, and I think it would be a waste of council resources. And I don't agree that there should be a seminar on it. However, if that is seen as a fair way to go, I just don't think it would be carried, and I think it'll waste all of our time.
Thank you.
Can I offer a different take on it then, Chair, if I may? Clearly, there's different views or clear views around the table that we don't think we're going to get a 2/3 majority. So should I initially just put straw poll all members and we just come back with a number just to see it? And if that number is high enough, given the views that are coming out in this committee, then we don't waste the time with the members seminar. Entirely up to members. That's a view that you think is appropriate at the minute. We can do that. If it's close, then we'll arrange a seminar and go down that route.
Very, very.
Is everybody happy with that course of action, potential course of action? It seems to be from the nods that I'm seeing. Right, Councillor Davis, I'm aware that you haven't actually had your chance to speak yet, so and Councillor Watts. So we'll come back to to decide on your suggestion now, John. All right.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think that's an entirely sensible recommendation, John. I was only going to make the point that I thought I couldn't really improve on the strength of argument advanced by Councillor Wright. There is simply no democratic mandate for these reforms, for these proposed changes. The Conservative group alone amounts to 39% of all elected councillors. I'm sure there are disagreements amongst the Labour benches on any reform of the voting system. I just don't see how this is a good use of any council time or resource, and I'm pleased that John has proposed this compromise, which seems to me to be entirely sensible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Watts?
Well, the only thing I'd say in favour of it, it does clearly state, it says, and I would be entirely in favour of this little bit, it says, so maybe our point could be a little bit more nuanced as opposed to let's just kick it into touch. The role of the Boundary Commission, how it conducts its electoral reforms. John will back me up on this, or he might not, but the review of the boundaries really on the last election was a dog's dinner. So if you remember the way that they approached this last time was that they didn't want any joint member wards, and then because they confused themselves to death, bearing in mind that my ward physically is probably the most, in the whole of Wales, probably the most eastern ward, really. I was never quite sure if they did their maths, the beginning of the whole numerical numbers game really in my ward and finished it somewhere in Abergavenny or vice versa. But there's 2 times now they've made a dog's dinner off it. And in the end, they abandoned the initial proposals, ignored our advice. When, if John remember, we actually went back to council. It was endorsed. We did a breakdown of the wards, so we had single member wards, and then they introduced joint member wards. But when you ask them why they did this, they refuse to answer. They're just absolutely abysmal, and how they frankly sustain themselves. Yeah, I would go as far as to say I think that whole process last time wasn't fit for purpose. I know that's a rather strong thing to say, but it was an absolute dog's dinner, and I was embarrassed really that they came out. However, what I will say, to Maureen's point, is that I think sometimes you can be, as I say, I've been here a long time, so I'm of a school where, like Maureen, I said, I've been on the council a long time now. I think you can over-identify yourself with the people that you have. I've got a lot of new people in my ward. Most of them are Bristolian, and they're very welcome. Like Peter is on this council, the Bristolians are always welcome in Monmouthshire. But the point is, if I may say so, Chair, is that things change. Yeah. Now, I would have been completely opposed to having a joint member ward. So forgive me, I'm going to contradict in part what the points I've just made. I've got Sue. I wasn't really sure whether or not he was going to work with Sue. You know, someone else doing a job with you. It's a job share, isn't it? Effectively. So just under 4,000 people. In fact, so far, and I'm probably tempting fate now, it'll probably go disastrously wrong, and we'll have the group whipping or something next week. But the point is, it's working all right. I'm really surprised by the whole thing. You know, Sue's actually getting on with me. I haven't fallen out with Sue yet. It's all right, Chair. So what I'm trying to say to you is I'm not completely opposed to joint member wards. I think they're workable, even for the more difficult people like myself.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. I think, Councillor McConnell, I didn't invite you to speak earlier on. I do apologise.
No, I think John's, that's fine, thank you. I think John's suggestion is a good one. I'm I sort of, and I think if there is clearly a strong sense that this isn't going anywhere, then it would be a shame to waste all those resources. The bit that I worry about slightly is that, you know, we are not we're a relatively small number of people, and so I think that needs to be tested carefully and phrased carefully so that it's an open question rather than a "do you agree that?" Would you like to kick this into touch and not waste any time? You know, it needs to be quite a open question. And I would just also say in Anston, my first taste of politics was to be president of my students' union in 1980 something or other, and I was elected on the single transferable vote system, and it went very smoothly and very successfully. So it's not a new kid on the block. It does occur in other places. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is it everybody's view then that we should ask John to do I think his words were a straw poll of councillors in general, so that we can find out if there is likely to be a 2/3 majority, and in the event of there not being a 2/3 majority, we could kick this into touch. There's nodding.
Yeah.
Okay, that seems to be fairly universal agreement. John, can we leave that to you, please?
Can I just say, if there's scope to think that a 2/3 majority might be possible as against a clear 2/3, so that
Yes, fair comment.
It's open. If there's room for debate, we should have one.
Definitely, yes.
Some of us are not that experienced in it, so a seminar might be useful for us to understand more.
Okay. So, are we having a seminar or not? The overall.
No, I meant sorry. What Sue just said about it not being precisely in the straw poll doesn't have close-ish, so that
in the event
because
of it
some of
being
us might
close, we'll
change
have a
our
seminar
minds if we have
and
more
then
information.
vote.
Is all.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not black and white. Not
Right.
Brexit.
Okay, over to you then, John, for that action, if you're happy to do that on our behalf.
Sorry, can I just say, could you make sure that every member has, a copy of your memo and also the draft paper on electoral reform? Because yes, as Councillor Bond said, not everyone will have experience of it. Or no.
It won't just be a yes or no survey. I think we'll open it up as well. Would you want a seminar on it to get more information as well? Things like that. We just have a couple of questions, try and paint a bigger picture around it, but at least that'll give us an initial steer as to where we're actually gonna end up with how much resources we want to actually put into it.
And also, I have read the information, but I would like more. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. And thanks everybody for your input there. We'll move on to item 7, which is the white paper on electoral administration and reform. John, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again, Chair. A big consultation document here, not intended, I don't think, that everything in it is for the committee and for us to respond to. But there are some specific aspects and questions contained within it that relate specifically to councillors. The two main ones really being, should we revert back to a 4-year term for council rather than 5? And the other one is around mandatory training for councillors and whether that should be set in legislation or somebody given specific duties to enforce that. So just coming back to the terms of council, I think we've had a 5-year term of council for the last 3 terms, and we've always had to. It's always started off as 4, and then they've added another year on because it's clashed with another election or something somewhere along the line. So under the Local Government and Elections Act, whilst government determined that the term for councils going forward from May 22 onwards would be 5 years. That was agreed with the backdrop of scheduling elections in a way that there were no combinations. So you wouldn't have all out local elections combining with a Senate election, a general election, or at the time a European election. The reason the questions come back up now, the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act has obviously been repealed, so we can have a general election at any point at the whim of the Prime Minister. We no longer have European elections, and so at some point it's very likely that this 5-year cycle, or the reason for the 5-year cycle coming in, is going to fall foul at some point, and we're going to have to add another year on again to a term of council at some point in the future. There were lots of questions at the time around whether a 5-year term is too long. for a councillor? Do they get too settled in the role? Is 4 years enough, sufficient, etc.? I'll let you determine and put your views across on what you think is the most appropriate, but I'm making you aware that the questions being asked, and if people consider 5 years too long, then we should be responding to the consultation along those lines. On the training aspect of it, it's been a topic that's come up quite often at inductions for councillors, is what's mandatory training and what's not mandatory training, and what role can the council have in determining what's mandatory and what's not. And essentially, the council can only make mandatory training for the code of conduct. In signing your declaration of acceptance of office, you agree to abide by the code of conduct, and as such, you need to be trained in that code of conduct, which makes it a mandatory element of the training programme. By default, the two other sorts of training sessions that are mandatory are for planning and licensing, where we've got those quasi-judicial committees where there are a lot of outside factors and other legislative pieces of work that we have to adhere to, and policies in making a decision. And it's not just making a decision based on what your thoughts are. There are other factors that we need to consider and adhere to other bits of legislation. So if you're sitting on planning or licensing, we pretty much make those mandatory before you can sit on there and make a decision. Otherwise, you'll be making a decision on behalf of the council when you're not suitably qualified to do so. Outside that, there is no scope for us as a council to say this is the mandatory training you should have. So they're exploring whether something should be made mandatory, whether they put that into legislation, that there are specific training modules you should do, whether perhaps the WLGA should be setting what's mandatory and what's not. Should we as a council be setting what's mandatory training for new councillors or not? So again, I'll open the floor up to members for their views on that, and not necessarily the topics. I think we're not at that stage yet, what should or shouldn't be mandatory. But if there was mandatory training for members, who should be making the decision on what is the most appropriate training for them within that authority? Again, this is a consultation, so if we want to respond to the consultation with anything, then can we make clear that we want to do so? And yeah, over to members for any views.
Okay, thank you, John. Councillor Watts, I think you were the first to wave.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I think it should be the WLGA. I think they're a better place to do it. I think it takes the responsibility off our shoulders, and they can have an overall perspective on it that maybe see things through different eyes. Really, I think that's probably my view. Is that's probably healthy. I'm sorry to say that what I think that is lacking here on the specifics is if I was going to have a conversation with the WLGA, it would be then training specifically over legislation that's surrounding about privacy and issues to do with safeguarding, whether that's adult safeguarding and children's safeguarding, and access to information and advocacy within that arena to do with social services. The problem we've got at the moment, it's you don't know anything about it, and you will then meet the wall. And I know this happens in other local authorities, is that if you make a kind of any representation, if there's something rather horrible and the family came to you in a very distraught situation, you've got to know whether or not that subject matter is something you can involve yourself in, or that you cannot, or what to what degree. What you get is a block off sometimes from social services. I'm sorry to say this, Penny might disagree with me, and I'm sorry if she does, that effectively it's a safeguarding issue. You're not privy to any information when sometimes you are. I'll give you a very brief example of that. The children that ended up being on the kind of looked after register that we didn't know about, that the authority were looking after, and they turned out to be EUSS children. Those children, we were completely, the scope of investigation into that initially completely blocked off. It wasn't until the Home Office stats came out that we identified that the authority were at fault. Now that took 6 months of denial, the legal department scratching their head, and Dimitri and myself then trying to get to the bottom of an issue which was fundamentally important, really, to safeguarding other children that might also be at risk. So it's about scrutiny and doing your job properly. So I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but I do think there needs to be broader scope for new members and experienced members about the legal issues surrounding access to information and how far you can go and how far you can't go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Councillor Jones, Penny.
I think I'll come back on Armand's points first, shall I, Councillor Watts? Yes, I agree there have been a few glitches here and there, but on the whole, I think training is really important for new members, and also updates throughout their term to all members, because safeguarding is one of the most important issues within the council. And one thing I would say is that, yes, you always report above. So if you have an issue that you think is confidential or extremely worrying, you go to the person above you, so it'd be your leader or whatever. They then deal with it at that level and so on. You probably, if it is extremely confidential or you know, there are problems, issues, then you won't get to hear any more about it, except in general terms. And that's just the way it has to be. Having said that, yes, there are issues which you need to know as a member in a ward, and I agree with that, Councillor Watts. But on the whole, I think training would be advantageous to all. Anyway, I wasn't coming in on that, but I was going to say that the 4 years, we've done 4 years and 5 years, and in reality, at the end of the 3rd year, the whole of the next year, the 4th year, is taken up with the election. It just seems ludicrous, but you're talking about it all the time, from May the previous year and right through. So it's almost, you know, you can get on with your work, but really you have to get on with the election to do this.
Sorry.
So really it's 3-year term. So I felt with the 5-year term that we settled down much more, that we were able to do much more, accomplish much more before, you know, it all went election mode again. So my advice, my feeling would be that the 5-year term is a better term.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Strong.
Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Jones on the 5-year cycle. I mean, it's clearly designed to fit in with the sort of fixed term parliaments that we have in the Welsh Assembly. On mandatory training, on the whole, I'm not in favour of it. I think once it is mandatory, it starts to become very bureaucratic and inflexible. Monmouthshire clearly treats training very, very seriously. I mean, the number of seminars we've had and so on. However, having listened to Councillor Watts, I would agree with him that there are certain fields in which perhaps it should be made mandatory, and safeguarding certainly should be one of those.
Thank you. Councillor Howells.
Yeah, on the training, really, as a new councillor myself, I found that, you know, the inductions and the training has been invaluable, and I would really recommend that, as was pointed out, that some should be mandatory and others maybe just as advisory. There's so many services offered by the council that you know, as or certainly as a new councillor, you wouldn't really get the grasp of any of them without those training courses. So I've been in favour of certain ones anyway being mandatory.
Okay, thank you. It seems that we're in favour of training and in favour of a 5-year period then, from the comments we've heard. But anything to add, John?
No, nothing from me, other than does the committee want me to respond to the consultation on the committee's behalf to support those 2 elements, that mandatory training we're in favour of in certain aspects, the 5-year term?
Yeah, that seems to be the views. Those seem to be the views expressed. So, sorry, Councillor McConnell.
I was also picking up on John. There's this recent experience as a school governor and a member of the fire services where I'm required to do training on safeguarding and something else, and so that thing where we start to duplicate things. that we already know. And as a probation officer of nearly 40 years, I'm up to my eyeballs in safeguarding training and data protection and all the rest of it. So I'm just concerned that if we just give a general response, I would like to add that mandatory training for a small number of very specific topics, rather than giving full license to some industry to develop where councillors are used and are required to go through various training. And of course, it all depends on how good the training is as to how relevant and useful it is. So some really good training on 2 or 3 things would be very welcome.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Chair, one very minor comment, and I don't know whether it's appropriate for us to discuss or reflect on this and to convey whatever strength of feeling there may be on this issue to the Welsh Government. But I note in this consultation document that the Welsh Government is also proposing a new power that would enable Welsh ministers to compel local authorities to partake in specific pilots around electoral innovation. In the past, you'll recall, particularly some of the neighbouring authorities around Monmouthshire and Blaenau Gwent, Torfaen, local authorities have been invited to submit bids to participate in certain pilots and to bring forward some innovative ideas in terms of how we might improve participation rates in local government, which seems entirely appropriate, and indeed a number of those pilots have been successful. But to grant Welsh ministers the power to compel certain electoral pilots seems to me to sit uncomfortably with a commitment to subsidiarity and to local government. I think, if this authority wants to innovate and wants to roll out specific pilots to boost participation, particularly amongst 16-year-olds or other harder to reach demographics who historically perhaps have not engaged with the participatory process, that to me seems entirely sensible. But I feel deeply uncomfortable that Welsh ministers should have the power, as is being proposed in this consultation, to compel local authorities to participate in electoral innovations. And perhaps we might reflect on that and whether that might be something we may also want to convey a view on to Welsh ministers.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Strong, do you wish to come back?
Yeah, just very quick. It pains me to say so, but I do agree with Councillor Davis on that one. On the mandatory training, again, what Councillor McConnell said is absolutely right. I wouldn't want the training that we now get from Monmouthshire to be replaced by training from anonymous figures in the WGLA. Part of the purpose of the training we get in Monmouthshire, again, it's part of that process of getting to know who's who, which is so important for councillors trying to do casework for their wards. So yeah, so just mandatory training in a very restricted number of areas.
Training that's relevant and local, then it sounds like. Okay, John, have you got enough information there to frame your response, or our response rather? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll just in response to some of the concerns there on small and specific topics or outside organisations providing the training. I think the intention of the legislation is more to ensure that local authorities have some control or some say in ensuring members have got sufficient information and had sufficient training to deal with some of the issues that they find within their role. Because if they don't engage in the training process at all, then it's likely breaches of the code of conduct can come up a lot easier, or they can act inappropriately a lot easier. So, I mean, the devil will be in the detail.
This is my agenda.
Just asking a simple question of, are we in favour of it, which we are, and as the
services agenda
time, then we can bring it back to the committee to make that as well. Just on Councillor Davis's comment on mandatory electoral pilots, I'll be responding to the consultation as well, because there are quite a lot of things that affect the administration of elections and how we actually deliver those. Some big costs within the proposals that aren't going to get a lot of benefit out the back of it either. And one of those things we'll be responding to is that we're not in favour of mandatory electoral pilots within being told how we should run an election as well. partly because for some of those pilots that were undertaken in May, we suggested we could go even further, and Welsh Government didn't want to even look at that option. We said to Welsh Government before the May's election on some of the pilots they undertook in terms of early voting, these are things we could have been doing 10, 15 years ago, not now. So if we want to really explore technological advances in how people are going to engage with us, we're in the best position to do it, and we know how to do it. But I hope that gives you some sort of sense of support for the comment that you relayed, and we have the same feelings from a delivery perspective as well.
That's good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John. Penny, did you want to come back in?
Can I just add just something? I don't know how this comes into it, but corporate parenting training, we tried to make mandatory. I mean, well, we did. We said it's absolutely a necessity, and I think we got 23 out of 24 or something in the end out of one group. So, you know, that's really important, and I think we should still aim for that. Does that come under this, or is that, you know, a monmouthshire?
There's different aspects to it. So some things like the safeguarding. There are other legislative requirements that say all staff and all councillors have to have that. So there's an element of legislation sat completely outside of the members' scope and the local government scope, but you have to do this. Corporate parenting may be one of those, but again, when we get down into the detail and what should be mandatory and what shouldn't be mandatory, we'll bring it back. I think, you know, we'll be having those discussions with whoever's going to be determining what's mandatory or not. WLGA is going to be the likely most appropriate because we already work with them as a host of Welsh authorities to work through a recommended training programme, try and encourage what's mandatory and what's not, but we haven't got any power to make it mandatory. And this is where I think the drive for that is coming from, that some of these things really should be mandatory for members, and everybody should be doing it before they sit in a committee and have the power to make a decision on the impact of that decision that they're going to make.
And could I just say also that sometimes from an inspection point of view, we are required to train everybody. I mean, safeguarding being one instance, you know, our last inspection was very good, but, you know, before that it wasn't because we hadn't trained enough staff and various other things. But anyway, that was one of the reasons that we had to take into account. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McConnell?
It's just a quick thought. This is a slight tangent, but it just came into my head, and I think it might be, so it's relevant to training. As a working councillor, I have to negotiate time, as I have today, to attend meetings and things. I'm a person, my learning style is I prefer to learn in the room rather than online. I just find it much, much easier. And this just popped into my head, but the idea that a meeting to which I was scheduled to attend would have a half-hour sort of bite-sized learning attached to the beginning of it might be a really helpful way for councillors to gain knowledge and experience, you know, gain knowledge and understanding rather than being unable to attend a training event, you know, for an afternoon. So I'm just wondering whether there are so many new councillors at the moment, whether the idea of having bite-sized chunks of training would be
potentially we can
advance the meeting, and you could just then those people who have already had the training or that have the knowledge don't have to turn up. The likes of me, not knowing what's going on, I could just dial in half an hour earlier and have a interesting bit of learning.
Yeah, potentially, definitely something we can explore. So, for example, for the license at the last licensing committee, they had a 2-hour training, update and refresher session since their training from the induction, just to make sure they reinforcing some of those points and considerations they need to make in determining applications, but is relevant to the application that they're going to be considering in the meeting afterwards. So you learn it and then you do it. It's easier in that setting to do it. When you open the wider scope of some of the decisions we're making, half hour might not be an option, but if we can find ways of doing it, then certainly.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It seems that we've dealt with the items on the agenda, apart from noting the date of the next meeting, which is the 23rd of January 2023. Thank you for your attendance, and may I be the first to wish you a happy Christmas and a happy New Year. Nadolig llawen, blwyddyn newydd dda. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
Thank you.